the 1500s, there was a famous artist who did a lot of work in Italy when they were putting up churches here and there, especially in Assisi, where St. Francis was from. His name was Fra Angelico, and even though he was a Dominican, the Franciscans hired him to paint the inside of their churches with frescoes. He did one of the Annunciation, the event which we just heard in the Gospel. And he has Gabriel facing Mary, and Gabriel's words to her are on like a ribbon going from his mouth to her. And what Mary says to Gabriel is on a similar ribbon coming in the other direction. We would use little clouds like they do in the comic strips, but the words were on ribbons. But the interesting thing is that Mary's words are written backwards and upside down. You'd have to have a mirror to read them. And we don't know why he did that, but I think we can guess. Gabriel's message to Mary, God's message to Mary, was completely unexpected and unpredictable. She was an ordinary girl in an ordinary town with an ordinary background. And despite all the things we like to think about Mary and all the legends that have grown up around her, there's no indication that she was different in anybody's eyes from any other girl of that age in that situation. So there was nothing unusual about her. The only thing that was unusual was that she found favor with God, which means that the activity here, the accomplishment here, wasn't Mary's, it was God's. God accomplished something through Mary, which we all believe very sincerely, or we wouldn't be celebrating next Thursday the Feast of Christmas. Mary's only role in the whole accomplishment was to say, as they used to say in Latin, fiat, let it be, let it be. She took that word which appears in the first chapter of Genesis when God says, let it be, let it happen, let there be light, let there be the earth, let there be humans on the earth. So Mary's role, even though she did not consider herself capable of doing what God wanted or being involved in it, after all, she said, how can this be? Good question, very sensible question. How can this be? Nevertheless, she acquiesced to what God wanted. She spoke not from a position of ability. She herself did not have what it takes to accomplish what God was going to do. Her gift was that she was available. Not the ability, but the availability of Mary is what we're going to celebrate this coming Thursday. And you can believe that she did not have any clue what her yes to God was going to bring about, any more than we have when we say yes to God. You know, it's interesting that Mary and David were both people with plans. David, in the first reading, was going to build this temple. And Mary, even though they probably weren't her plans, they were her parents' or her tribe's plans, she was going to get married to a young man of the same tribe and raise a family and do all those things which people in that age did in family life. Both had plans, and both plans were upset by God. Both eventually achieved great things because of their availability. They didn't rail against what God had planned for them because they didn't coincide, God's plan did not coincide with their plan. And that, I think, is the message of this Sunday before Christmas, that what God calls us to is not calls us for is not our abilities, our intelligence, our wisdom. Our availability is all He wants. He wants to do in us what He wants to do in us and with us in our place in time. God wants us to be available. And to be available, we have to listen. We have to be aware. We have to not assume that everything and everyone is going to be or turn out as we have fantasized it in most cases. That God is going to do in our lives the unexpected, even the unwanted. But we have to be aware of that. And the other thing to remember is that when God acts in somebody's life, He usually turns them upside down. After all, the child that was born of Mary set the world on its head. That's why He made so many enemies, because He began to say things that were not commonly accepted. Turn the other cheek. Give. Love. Be concerned more for another person than you are for yourself. People didn't like to hear this. That's why He ended up on a cross. Even in the church today, the Pope is saying things that some people don't like to hear because it isn't traditional Catholicism. It isn't that safe, cozy religiosity which many of us are tempted to involve ourselves with because it's comfortable. It's consoling. It makes me feel good. And the Holy Father is saying things like, forget yourself, echoing Jesus. Think of the poor. Stop being so concerned about material things. Enter more into communion with me in prayer. All kinds of things. He talks to all different levels of society. The commercial, the political, the personal, the family. And so as we prepare to celebrate the feast of Christmas, let us be aware of what we're celebrating and what we're getting ourselves into again. If we accept this child as Lord and Messiah, then we have to listen to what the Messiah has to say. And what the Messiah has to say is not always comfortable and comforting to us. But it has to be said, and more importantly, it has to be repeated by us in our day and in our age.